If you're wondering whether your horse sees you as a leader or a herd member, the question you're asking is probably the wrong one, because it assumes you have to choose one or the other from the start. Yet modern equine science shows that this assumption is flawed. Hierarchy in horse herds doesn't work like that straight ladder in our minds. It's not a single alpha at the top with everyone else in order below. When dominance relationships are mapped out, what emerges isn't a line but a network. Triangles, cross-links, and roles that constantly shift depending on the context. You, too, are somewhere within this network, but exactly where you stand is a far more layered issue than you might think. Welcome. Today's topic is where your horse actually places you. It might sound strange at first because we humans always think of hierarchy as a ladder. A horse herd isn't like that. It's more like a complex group of friends where everyone is connected to each other to varying degrees, and no one can be considered the boss in the strict sense. If you watch a herd roaming freely across a vast pasture for a long time, you'll see this with your own eyes. Before the sun has even risen, the scent of dew on the grass hangs in the air as the herd glides slowly toward the water. Their ears never stop moving. One turns forward, another to the side, as if each horse is listening to both its surroundings and the herd at the same time. As two horses approach each other, the sound of their hooves echoes softly on the ground. One pulls back, the other moves forward. The one yielding the way, the one taking the way. At first glance, it seems simple, but the ears tilt back for a moment, the tail swishes slightly, the weight shifts to the hind legs. It all happens in a tiny fraction of a second, almost imperceptibly. But don't look away, watch a little longer. A third horse enters the scene, and the one that was just yielding the way is now taking it. When the fourth horse arrives, the order shuffles again. When behavioral scientists systematically record these relationships, what they find is not a linear hierarchy. It's a pattern they call intransitive. A is superior to B is superior to C, but C can be superior to A. This cycle, which seems impossible on paper, is extremely common in the pasture. This is not an anomaly, it's the rule. Observational studies show that this pattern is far more common in herds than expected. When you try to establish a straightforward who is superior to whom list, the system generally resists it. In other words, a herd is not a hierarchy but a constantly updating network of relationships. This network determines much more than just who gives way to whom. It has tangible consequences. Observational studies show that the survival rate of foals born to mares with strong social bonds is significantly higher than that of foals born to mares with weak bonds. In other words, a horse's position within the network, beyond simply who it spends time with, can translate into a real survival advantage. Socializing within the herd is not just a pleasure for horses, it's a direct survival strategy. A likely reason for this is that horses with strong bonds can alert one another more quickly, act more coordinately when protecting their foals, and, by staying close to one another during times of tension, enhance the many eyes on watch advantage characteristic of prey animals. What I'm about to explain will seem even more striking once you've learned this. Because when a horse decides where to place you within this network, it isn't dealing with a trivial question. It's directly addressing its own survival strategy. But first, we need to examine why this dynamic went unnoticed for so long. The origin of the alpha horse concept is actually not the horse, but the wolf. A model derived from observations of wolf packs made decades ago, and later largely abandoned, was adapted to horses as is. Interestingly, the refutation of this model also took place in two stages. First, wolf researchers abandoned their own model because that alpha wolf pattern emerged not in natural packs, but in artificial groups of unrelated wolves brought together in captivity. Then, horse behaviorists applied the same question to their own field and arrived at a similar conclusion. There is no clear-cut leader in natural, free-roaming herds. And that's precisely the problem. Horses aren't wolves. As prey animals, their social structures have been shaped by entirely different pressures, such as escape distance, visual acuity, and a constantly shifting perception of threat. In a moment of uncertainty, a horse doesn't consult a fixed list of titles when deciding whom to follow. Instead, it weighs the current conditions, its current level of trust, and the information available at that moment. This shows that a role within the herd isn't something earned once and held forever. Rather, it's a position that's constantly renegotiated. You might be wondering how they measure it. They spend hours observing the herd, recording every moment of approach and retreat, who gives way to whom, who reaches the water first, who steps back when someone else approaches their food. When thousands of these small moments come together, the result isn't a simple list but a complex map, and this map can vary from herd to herd and even from season to season. This pattern is observed not only in domesticated herds but also in wild Mustang herds living undisturbed. This means it's not an artificial order produced by domestication. It's a social architecture inherent to the horse species that emerges even when they live on their own. This is most evident in preferential relationships. Horses do not groom each other at random. They choose specific friends. Mutual grooming, known as allogrooming, typically occurs repeatedly among the same few horses. Even more interestingly, when the herd is going through a stressful period, this preferential grooming becomes more frequent but shorter in duration. It's as if the relationship becomes a resource that's drawn upon more frequently during times of tension, but is depleted more quickly. I need to mention something right here, but I'll leave it hanging for a moment. This pattern of preferential relationships bears almost the same signature as what I'll describe shortly, namely the bond between you and your horse. This turn will come. Now it's your turn. Let's place you within this network. Because whether you realize it or not, you are a node in this network within your horse's mind, and the criteria your horse uses to place you there aren't all that different from the ones it uses to evaluate the other horses in the herd. The strongest evidence lies in secure base behavior. Place a horse in an uncertain or slightly unsettling environment, a foreign area, an unfamiliar trail, an unfamiliar sound. The behavior it exhibits when its primary rider or caretaker is present differs measurably from that when a stranger is present. Startle responses decrease, reaction time to threats shortens, and the return to exploration accelerates. When the same horse is placed in the same environment with a stranger, the picture reverses, reaction time lengthens, the head raises more frequently, and environmental scanning intensifies. In other words, the horse responds to the same threat with two separate trust budgets. One when you're there, and one when you're not. Think of it this way. The horse pricks up its ears at an unfamiliar sound, its body is on high alert, and an escape route is forming in its mind. All of this happens within seconds. But if you're right there beside it at that moment, this chain of reactions is broken sooner. It's as if your presence there provides the horse with an additional source of information to reassess how serious the threat is, just as a herd member relaxes when alongside a trusted friend. The next time you take your horse to a new place, you might notice this. As it scans its surroundings, does its gaze frequently drift toward you? This isn't obedience. It's assessment. It's constantly checking on you as if you were a reference point. Neither one, on its own, fits perfectly into the leader or friend category. The horse that comes closest to this role in the herd isn't the one at the top of the hierarchy. It's the trusted, preferred horse. This can sometimes even be the youngest or calmest member of the herd, because age or strength isn't a prerequisite for earning trust. These two qualities may sometimes be found in the same horse, but more often than not, they are not. A practical way to distinguish between them is this. When observing the hierarchy, look at who yields the way to whom. When observing trust, look at who the horse runs to when stressed. Most often, these two do not point to the same horse. The second piece of evidence lies in the relationship between recognition and relaxation. Horses can distinguish a familiar person by both their voice and their appearance. When this recognition occurs, the horse's behavior in that person's presence changes in measurable ways. Muscles relax, ears scan the surroundings less, and the head is held lower. This isn't a simple reflex like remembering a familiar scent. It's a cross-modal recognition that shows the horse can match sound with sight, meaning it can recognize you even just by your voice. In other words, in your horse's mind, you aren't just a trace from a single sense but an identity confirmed through multiple channels at once. Think about this. The moment your horse hears your voice, even before seeing you, something begins to change within its body. This is a learned signal of trust, and it's important that it's learned because it isn't innate. It arises from the same sound being repeatedly paired over time with the same safe outcome. From your perspective, this has a practical implication. If your relationship with your horse is still new, or if you can't clearly see this secure base response, it doesn't mean there's a deficiency. It just means there hasn't been enough repetition yet. Your place in the network isn't a fixed destiny. It's a process still in the making. In some horses, this becomes clear within a few months. In others, it may take longer. Past experiences, the horse's temperament, and even previous human relationships can influence this timeline. This is exactly where the term earned comes into play. In a herd, no bond is formed with a single gesture or in an instant. Both your preferential grooming friendships and your secure base bond go through the same slow-building process: consistent repetition, predictable outcomes, and evidence that builds up over time. In other words, there's no single moment when your horse weighs you up. Every encounter adds another small data point to this assessment. So why do we still tend to divide things into either leader or friend? Probably because that's how our own social world works. Human groups always seek clear roles, distinguishing who's the boss and who isn't. Projecting these patterns onto a horse is a natural reflex. Yet the horse is unaware of your categories. It's simply weaving its own network, and within it, a single node can be tied to more than one thread at the same time. So where does all this lead us? A horse in a herd sometimes acts like a leader. It clears the way, makes decisions, and takes the lead. On the other hand, that same horse becomes a secure base at a different moment. People approach it, groom it, and seek refuge in it. These are not two separate roles. They are different facets of the same network that come into play in different contexts. It's no different for your horse. Perhaps it lets you take the lead on a new trail and is willing to follow behind. In that moment, it's lending you the role of leader. However, if that same horse approaches you when something unexpected startles it, it begins to use you as a secure base. Both are true and both can be valid at the same time because both are part of the same network. You can also see it this way. The same horse you impatiently chase after during morning feeding time can become completely passive and surrender to you while being groomed in the afternoon, and then suddenly cling to you when an unfamiliar dog approaches in the late afternoon. Although they may seem like three distinct behaviors, three separate roles, they are all simply different facets of the single relationship that one horse builds with you in a single day. The moment you realize this, your perspective on your horse changes. The question, "How does he see me?" gives way to, "What does he expect from me in that moment?" As the number of horses in your care increases, this difference becomes even more apparent. Each one weaves a unique fabric of relationship with you. Some always follow you as if you were a trailblazer, while others see you more as a shelter. The same person and the same attitude are present, but each horse weaves its own network based on its own experiences. As you were growing up, the question of who's the boss at home was probably always clear. There was a hierarchy, a fixed order. In a herd of horses, there's no such clarity. But that doesn't mean your horse is confused. On the contrary, its social intelligence has long since grasped that you don't fit into a single mold and that you have different needs depending on the context. So how do you pick up on this with your own horse? In an uncertain moment, a new place, an unexpected sound, an encounter with an unfamiliar animal, notice where your horse's gaze rests first. No matter how brief that glance may be, it reveals far more about your place in the network than any words ever could. What's interesting is that this isn't just tied to the immediate context, but may also depend on your horse's own relationship style. Researchers have even begun measuring the human-horse bond using the secure, anxious, and avoidant axes from human attachment theory. It appears that some horses, just like some people, generally tend to be more secure or more cautious in their relationships. In short, where your horse places you is shaped not only by the immediate circumstances but also by its unique relationship style. The practical implication is this: if your horse doesn't turn to you right away in a new situation, it doesn't necessarily mean you've done something wrong. Some horses build trust more slowly and gradually, just as some people tend to be more cautious in their relationships. The speed at which this happens doesn't necessarily indicate the strength of the bond. Here's what it means. Two different horses may not respond to you and to your consistent behavior in the same way. One might quickly trust you and place you right at the center of its network. Another, even if it sees the same consistency, might proceed more slowly and cautiously. Neither is wrong. They simply have different bonding styles. You'll come to understand which style your horse leans toward not all at once, but through observations that accumulate month by month. The key here is not to interpret your horse's reaction in the moment as if it were a test score. If one morning your horse doesn't follow you as if you were the leader, that doesn't mean your relationship has broken down. Or if it pulls away from you in the evening, it simply means that the context of that moment or its need at that moment has changed. So there's no single correct answer to the question of whether your horse sees you as a leader or a herd member. Not because we can't answer it. It's because the question itself tries to confine the world of horses into our own categories from the start. The real answer is likely not somewhere in the middle. It's a place where both are valid at the same time in different contexts. Perhaps the most honest approach is to stop trying to pin a fixed label on your horse and start noticing which role it assigns to you at any given moment. Because that awareness is the most realistic way to map out your relationship. Here's the really interesting part. Science shows that horses don't pigeonhole us into a specific category. That ambiguity isn't a shortcoming. On the contrary, It's proof of just how multifaceted the bond your horse forms with you is. The next time you go to your horse, don't keep asking what role you've given it. Instead, observe which role it gives you at any given moment. The answer might turn out to be far more interesting than a single word. So, in your opinion, in which moments does your horse treat you like a leader, and in which moments like a safe haven? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm genuinely curious. Remember, every answer you find is temporary. None of them are set in stone. Seasons pass, you grow older, your shared history builds up layer by layer. That network continues to weave itself endlessly. Today's answer doesn't have to be next year's answer. This doesn't mean your relationship is breaking down, but rather that it continues to grow. When you close the video, the only thing you need to do isn't just wait for the next episode. It's to go to your horse. Because the real answer to this question isn't on the screen. It's hidden in the moments today when your horse gives you a certain role. This network's weaving doesn't end here. If you want to continue with the same curiosity, subscribe and stay tuned.